This is Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart. We're on PlayStation 5 looking at this next generation Ratchet and Clank experience. So we get 3 different modes on this. I do have a comparison video that breaks it down further, but essentially you're getting Performance, which is a dynamic 4K 60. You're getting Performance RT, which is again a dynamic resolution scaling as well, up to 4K, but with ray tracing and some lesser effects. And finally, Fidelity, which is the default mode of the game, which is a high 4K resolution at 30 FPS with some ray tracing effects as well, and some higher visual elements and assets within the experience. So for the most part, this should be presenting the gameplay at the 4K 60, just the performance mode, because I thought that one really had a beautiful picture to it, a very good quality. But I did also play through the entirety of the experience with the RT as well as a stream on the channel if you want to see what that looks like in action. And I think one of the clips in here kind of does that. So anyways, moving aside from the technical elements of the experience, so there's HDR support too, I should mention as well, which, you know, pops. The color just, it's really crazy, like the lava and stuff. But trying to get onto the actual gameplay itself. This game, it's great. It really is a true next-gen experience. I consider it right up there with the Demon's Souls remastered experience in terms of feeling like a true next-generation game. This could not have been achieved on last-gen consoles, and it is a beautiful experience. Every single place is filled to the brim with detail, and you feel like you're in these massive, expansive, realistic places. Just the opening segment, which you'll see later on, there's like crowds of people, there's fireworks, there's balloons, and it goes on and on and on. And you feel like you're in this huge futuristic society, which is super cool. And the story itself is actually really interesting as well. And they've put in these riffs as a way to kind of show off the next-gen tech of the SSD, which is just crazy. Like, you're instantly in other places. There's no loading in this game. I can't remember a single instance where I had to load it at any time. You're just like instantly in other places in entirely different worlds. It's crazy. During combat, it's more of a gimmick, the portals, but when you're doing traversal or puzzle solving, they actually feel like a dynamic part of taking you somewhere entirely different from where you are. And that is really cool. Because you gotta remember, we're right at the beginning of the generation at this point. And games, usually at the beginning of the gen, you know, they look pretty good, but by the end, you know, things are changed entirely. They look even more insane. So to get this kind of visual bump right off the bat, I think is kind of amazing. And it's a really great game. It's a lot of fun. It was really enjoyable. I basically played through it twice in the span of a couple days, doing a stream and working through it myself as well. So I've got a good grasp of the game, more so than I normally even would for titles. So I really did have a lot of fun with it. I love the 2 characters. You know, obviously Ratchet and Clank are here, but I say 2 characters as in 2 sets of characters. So we've also got Rivet and then another robot as well, which I won't dive into too well, but it's basically, you know, dimensional versions of the set of Ratchet and Clank are being mirrored. And Rivet, actually, I wasn't sure I would connect as well with, considering, you know, Ratchet's been the face of the franchise, you know, Ratchet and Clank, obviously, for like, as long as, for almost all the PlayStation consoles, Ratchet and Clank's been around. I think PS2 is when it started, but anyways. And then to have Rivet come in, and she was actually a really great character, very fun, goofy sort of personality, whereas Ratchet almost seems like a bit more of a mature, helping other people kind of stance in this one, if that makes sense. Like, he's sort of taking on a bit more of a fatherly role, as odd as that sounds, just in regards to, you know, helping certain characters get inspiration. And it just seems like a level of maturity and stuff of the character, which I think is really interesting. And at this point, when the story starts, the characters, Ratchet and Clank, they've been retired a few years. They're a bit older. They haven't had any action for a while. And then, you know, a new plan by Dr. Nefarious sends things going wild with these crazy portals, so you're getting a connection of different worlds really quickly thrown together across a number of dynamic scenarios. There's a few different planets you get to visit, lots of scripted scenes, and just like a really seamless transition between these cutscenes and regular gameplay, to the point that sometimes you might not even notice the difference, or be like, oh wow, we were just like literally watching this seconds ago and now we're playing. I actually, sometimes I was kind of almost confused when it shifted over to me actually jumping in there and handling it myself. Like, I was like, oh, okay, this is gameplay, which I thought was really cool. It just does a really great job of being a dynamic and fairly expansive offering. Now, with that, I do wish that the game was a bit longer. It's about several hours long, at least for me to work through it, so probably about 7 to 10 hours. I don't usually like to include time, but I just felt that this should have been a little bit longer gameplay-wise. There are some side missions and a challenges area you can do, but you know, it's kind of a play it, and I was really done with it after, you know, especially going through it twice really, you know, shortly together. But it was a really wonderful experience. I think if you're a fan of Ratchet and Clank, you're going to really like the story because it takes things in a new direction, and I think it really, you know, builds up the franchise for exciting things to come, and I hope we get a sequel sooner than later. And if you're new to the franchise, I think this is a really good starting point, because you kind of get the gist of the characters, you get an idea of the universe, and they're introducing a new set of characters, and it's like its own little story while also, you know, building upon some of the history with nods and winks and stuff like that. So the game, you know, kind of revolves around platforming, shooting. It's mostly a shooter with some platforming elements, some... I think I fall off the cliff here, it's just pretty funny. Just hilarious there. But, you know, some platforming, some shooting, a little bit of puzzle solving here or there, and also some little collectibles and stuff you can gather along the way. Now, the story elements of exploring the worlds are really great, but then there's these moments where you're basically doing these puzzles with Clank or another robot, or like a little machine. So I like the little machine puzzles where you're like clearing out areas. Those are kind of fun. But the Clank puzzle missions were really awful. I did not enjoy them. I did not have fun with them. They, like the first couple, so, but then they kept pushing it in. So there's a certain point where you're almost done the game, and then it's like you have to do basically, I think it was about a half hour or so, just totally stopping the action, stopping everything you're doing, and you have to solve these puzzles. And it's just, it really killed all of the pacing of the game for me. Like, it's really intense, the action's really going there, we're getting to the end, and then it's like, oh, we gotta do the dimensional portal thing. And these look beautiful, and they're not too complex. Like, two of them I had some issues with, and I was very frustrated by them, because I was just like, I want to get back to what we're doing. This doesn't add anything to the story. It felt like they had a certain quota for time, and they were padding the story with it, which really was disappointing to me, because the story and the characters and the worlds are really great, and I wish there was more of that. It felt like there wasn't as much of that as there maybe could have been, and to me that was a little disappointing. But overall, it's really great. It's very well done. This feels super next gen. The particle effects just like drench the screen. Sometimes there's like bolts and destruction and characters and shots and rain coming down and these huge backdrops, and you feel like this part here, this is like, you really feel like you're in this intergalactic place, and it feels next gen, which is exciting because there's not a whole lot of games at this current point in time, I think, for any of the platforms out there that truly feel next gen in their delivery, and this is one of those that actually do that. And it's really exciting, because, you know, if you think about it, like the portals and the changing, you'd have to have like maybe lengthy like loading screens in between there, but here you just pop into another place, and then the visual animation and stuff of the characters, it feels like you're watching a Pixar movie, but you're kind of playing it. When I was doing a stream, which is, you know, something I try to do nowadays, I had people coming in, they'd be like, it feels like I'm watching a movie, and that's really neat, because they've gone to this level of fidelity within the environment, and this level of like really neat effects, such as like ray tracing and that's included, which is super cool in this, by the way, to the point where it's like you feel like you're moving beyond what would feel like a game that looks and kind of, you know, plays like a game. You actually feel like you're playing, you know, something that is more film or cinematic in style. And it's really interesting what they were able to achieve here. Insomniac, they're just incredibly amazing, especially since they just pumped out at this current point in time, you know, Miles Morales, like less than 6 months ago or whatever, or around 6 months ago. And now they've got this, you know, full Ratchet and Clank sequel. It's really quite exciting. But like I said, the puzzle areas, wasn't a fan of those. Totally take you out of what you're doing. They're not terrible, but it's just like a couple of them were just like, what is the point? Like, what are we doing here? And then, you know, it was a little short. It wasn't as long as I would have hoped, but it's still got a great story and a more matured narrative. It's a great next step for these characters. They have fun with it. There are some, I don't know if there's some surprises, but they play around with the characters and the mirroring dimensions quite well. And I'm very excited to see where they take things next. I hope it's not too long until we get to jump back into the Ratchet and Clank universe. But I was very happy with this. I had a lot of fun playing it. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was really good. And it's a great showcase of the next generation technology and just where games are going to take us, like the different modes, the different options. I do Highly suggest picking a 60 FPS mode, but like I said, I do have a video on the channel as well that breaks down the different visual options and talks about it a little bit more in depth, whereas this is more review oriented.